Development banks and states have pledged $14 billion over the next 4 years to the African Union's Great Green Wall initiative in the Sahel. The pledge was made at the One Planet Summit in Paris. The project aims to plant 100 million trees in a region hit particularly hard by the climate crisis and to counter the effects of desertification by creating jobs, boosting food security and reducing migration. Britain's Prince Charles has also launched a $10 billion initiative to provide businesses with a roadmap to a more sustainable future by 2030. Terra Carta promotes investment in natural capital and urges businesses to put people and the planet first in a bid to restore biodiversity.
With smart policies and the right investments, we can chart a path that brings health to all, revives economies, and builds resilience and rescues biodiversity. Innovations in energy and transport can steer a sustainable recovery and economic and social transformation. And nature-based solutions, such as Africa's Great Green Wall, are especially promising. Preserving the world's biodiversity also yields jobs. According to the World Economic Forum, emerging business opportunities across nature could create 191 million jobs by 2030.
Gavin Edwards joins us now from London. He's the global coordinator of the New Deal for Nature and People at WWF International. Welcome to the program, Gavin. Now, as with many other major events during this pandemic, the One World Summit has taken place online. What do you hope to achieve at this year's gathering?
Well, essentially, a few months ago, leaders from around the world made a pledge for nature. This summit today builds on that pledge. 82 countries have now signed that pledge, but pledges need to be turned into action. So what we saw today were a number of presidents and prime ministers committing to a variety of initiatives, not just for Africa, but on finance and in other areas as well, to really give some momentum for nature conservation and to help tackle climate change. Now, that is really important because 2021 is something of a super year for policy making around nature. Later this year, world governments will come together in China. They will set a roadmap, a 10-year roadmap to ensure that the world is reversing its nature loss. And governments will come together to renew their efforts on climate change in Glasgow at the end of the year as well. So this summit today kicked off that year of action through governments making pledges and upping their commitments for biodiversity and for the planet as well.
Yes, and the initial aim of the One Planet Summit was to achieve the objectives of the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, which, as we know, was designed to limit greenhouse gas emissions to levels that would prevent global temperatures from increasing more than 2%. Can you update us on what progress is being made on that front?
So there has been some progress, but not nearly enough. You know, we've averted disaster of a 4 degrees Celsius world, but we're heading towards a 3+ degrees Celsius world, which is really bad news for the planet. It's bad news for the economy. It's bad news for communities and people that depend on nature for sustenance and for their survival as well. So it is a good start, but much more needs to be done. One of the areas where real momentum has been lacking is on working on nature itself. About a third of the action needed to tackle climate change is through nature-based solutions. And there's been very little progress there. Some progress on renewable energy, on energy efficiency. Much more needs to be done, but very, very little progress on nature. So that is going to be the big theme for this year. How can governments catch up and accelerate their efforts so we can both avert a climate disaster and also start rebuilding wildlife populations and start rebuilding the planet that we depend upon for our food, for our health as well.
Now, tell us more about Terra Carta, which was unveiled by Prince Charles. Why is it important for the private sector to be involved in the climate crisis, and what can they do exactly?
So the private sector can play a key role because we think of nature conservation as protecting large areas. And today we heard that more than 50 governments will protect 30% of the lands and seas in the next decade. That's great. But you also have to deal with the drivers of biodiversity loss. That includes deforestation. And most importantly, that includes unsustainable agricultural practices. The business sector can play the bigger role here. It's businesses that could drive a sustainable or an unsustainable food production system. So companies signing up to new commitments, new science-based targets to tackle loss of nature in their supply chains, countries working with companies to, for example, prevent products linked to deforestation being shipped into Europe and elsewhere. All of these measures will help take away the incentive to destroy nature and can be replaced with incentives to rejuvenate nature instead.
Now, we know economies around the world have taken a big hit during this pandemic. Millions of people have lost their jobs. GDP has plummeted in pretty much every country around the world. Can you forgive governments for perhaps pushing the climate crisis down their list of priorities?
I think there is a win-win here. It's possible to do both. The economy, we know, is seriously stressed right now thanks to the response to the pandemic. But let's not forget that, first of all, this pandemic has its roots in the loss of nature, in the loss of biodiversity. When you destroy intact areas, when you allow for illegal wildlife markets, then the chances of future pandemics emerging are very, very high. So there is an imperative for governments to avoid future pandemics by making the right commitments to nature. That doesn't come necessarily at a cost. In fact, the World Economic Forum recently made some assessment and said 395 million new jobs, about 10 trillion in new business opportunity can be created through more nature-positive businesses, whether that's sustainable agriculture, sustainable tourism, and a whole host of other industries that can be stimulated by governments. So instead of bailing out maybe some airlines or some coal miners or other industries which are helping destroy the planet, by investing in and encouraging and incentivizing the right businesses, I think we can have a win-win here. Okay. The potential for less future pandemics and tackle climate change and nature loss as well.
Okay, Gavin Edwards from WWF International, thank you again for joining us on Money Talks.